Hey everybody. So I was digging through my computer and I found my old podcast from last summer, and I realized that that whole once a month thing didn't really work out. So I'm going to try the whole videocast thing because I find it easier to talk to a camera than to just talk into my microphone. So, I guess what I want to talk about today is I think I want to go kind of back into the whole religion thing. And the reason is because I covered this briefly in my first podcast, but I talked about how growing up in the charismatic Christian church is really what got me into the whole occult scene. And I kind of wanted to flesh that out a little bit, because to most people on both sides of the issue, that just seems completely crazy. Now, a lot of people I know or have met come from a Catholic background and transition fairly easily into a pagan practice, and the reason is there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of folk Catholicism that involves a lot of crossover with folk magic of various parts of the world. But I wasn't Catholic. I was raised Protestant, very, very much Protestant. But the fact still remains that what introduced me to the entire idea of the occult was my charismatic upbringing. And so I like I said, I kind of just want to flesh that out a little bit. So, I guess first things first. Growing up in the charismatic church that I did, there was a very heavy influence on the gifts of the Spirit as part of everyday spiritual practice. Now, I call it a charismatic church and not a Pentecostal church. There's a subtle difference there. The charismatic church encourages the fruits of the Spirit, not the fruits of the Spirit, the gifts of the Spirit, which I will get to in a minute. But they don't require the gifts of the Spirit, whereas a Pentecostal church generally either requires that you have the gifts of the Spirit or views gifts of the Spirit as signs of your spiritual maturity. And if you aren't manifesting any of the gifts of the Spirit, then you aren't showing any signs of spiritual maturity, which is kind of ridiculous, in my opinion, obviously. I have some Pentecostal friends, and that's always kind of been a bone of contention between myself and them. But yeah, so what are the gifts of the Spirit? Well, the gifts of the Spirit generally are things like prophecy, speaking in tongues, laying on of hands and healing. And there's a lot of other there's a lot of other things that come along with the atmosphere that fosters those gifts, and that a lot of people would generally associate with a more tribal or more pagan ceremony, like drum circles. Drum circles were huge at my church. Ecstatic dancing, and that's what I did every church service. I would go up front and I would skank. I would dance ecstatically to the worship music every Sunday morning. And it was just part of my worship. And, I almost saw people who had the more laid back church services that you see in movies and you see portrayed in the pop culture. I almost saw that as maybe not inferior, but definitely weird. I never realized how unique my particular upbringing was until I left the church. But no, so this atmosphere that I grew up in, just it encouraged these very strange, very occult practices. And of course, by occult, I mean hidden, secret, not very well known, not the general connotation of the word occult, which means, having to do with pagan. I mean in the actual literal denotation of the word occult, that which is secret, that which is hidden. And for most of my life, even before I left the church, my life verse, if you will, was Proverbs 25:2, which is, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of kings to search it out." Which, if you listened to my first podcast, God forgive you if you did. I'm sorry that it was so long. You'll know that is the verse with which I start my podcast. But yeah, this atmosphere encouraged these occult practices. The idea that you enter a trance state and you see the throne room of God, which I have done. You lay on hands and see healing done. You speak in tongues as part of your praise to the Most High God. All of these things were things that I have seen done and or have done in the past. The dreams and visions, all of these things that they're in the Bible, but they're generally downplayed by most of the major denominations. These were very, very important to my spiritual upbringing. And there are some very obvious parallels between that sort of, Christian Protestant occultism and a lot of the practices that are involved in your typical, Wiccan practice. The whole trance state with regards to shamanism, the idea of the drum circle and using that sort of boom baba doom baba doom baba doom bada da 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 to enter that trance and to see things that aren't there and to enter the other world. The idea of dreams and dream travel, the idea of seeing prophecy, of clairvoyance, all of these things. When I finally did leave the church for various reasons, it was no transition at all, really, for me to start looking into these pagan practices, which is one of the main reasons that I settled on paganism when I left the church. It felt like coming home. It felt like all of these things that I was raised to do were still available to me, And not only were they still available to me, but they also had fewer restrictions on the way that I worshipped and the way that I approached God and the way that I dealt with music and the way that I dealt with dancing and the way that I dealt with life in general. I felt that so much of the burden of condemnation was cast away from me. And I was able to express myself and just love, really, but also to more fully love the God that I have always worshipped. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure that the God that I have always worshipped really matches that is espoused by the, mainstream Christian denominations, because the God that I worship is all loving, and the God that I worship is, it is accepting and doesn't judge. And no, enough of that. I'm not gonna open that can of worms again. But you get what I'm saying. So yeah, that's what I mean by the parallels between this sort of occult Christianity and the occult. And I got my toes wet in Kabbalah, because the charismatic church I grew up in had a really, really strong connection to the Jewish roots of Christianity. So it was a more comfortable baby step to explore the Kabbalah than to, just jump off the deep end and be a druid, which is what I am now. But yeah, and in case you're wondering, I still dance ecstatically. I still speak in tongues, especially during my solar festival celebrations, my solstice and equinox celebrations. I still have prophetic dreams. I still see visions. I still am very, very strongly empathic. I very quickly pick up on the mood of individuals and also the mood of a room, which was a very, very important skill when you're one of the main ecstatic dancers at the front of a worship service. And really, the only thing that has changed in my spiritual practice are the labels that I use. And the labels that I use now, I feel, are more open and more accepting and less fundamentalist. Yeah, less fundamentalist. I can't deal with the whole idea of a text that has been edited by so many people with such strong political agendas being God-breathed. That's just ridiculous to me. You can see the evidences in the Bible of their political agendas. I don't see it. So, but again, I've been over that. Don't want to open that can of worms again. So, that's my video cast for today. Let me know, if I actually have any viewers, what you would like me to talk about next. I'd really like to start doing this more regularly. It's kind of a good stress reliever to just sit and talk into a mic and post it on the internet, whether or not anyone actually listens to it. So, yeah, if you have any questions about charismatic Christianity and how it relates to paganism and the occult, hit me up in the comments, or post on my Facebook wall if you are my Facebook friend. Or, I'll probably post this on my blog site as well. So if you follow me there, please, feel free to comment and let me know if you have any questions or any suggestions for future shows. All right. Peace.